What are development charges and why do they exist?
So development charges are fees collected from developers, usually at the time a building permit is submitted or during the early stages of that process. These fees, as you mentioned, Dan, they help to pay for the cost of infrastructure required to provide municipal services to that new development. They're used to fund essential things and infrastructure like roads, water, sewer, community centers, and even things like fire and police facilities.
So the thought is you're adding more people to a certain area. That'll put an increased strain on existing services and infrastructure. So you will need to spend money to update or increase the capacity of said services and infrastructure. And DCs is ideally where that money comes from.
Yeah, exactly. And in a lot of cases, development charges really serve as a municipality's primary financial tool for funding capital infrastructure projects.
But isn't there another way municipalities and government make money to support these costs? I believe it is one of the two certainties in life, one being death and the other being taxes.
Taxes, taxes, taxes.
Yes, you are correct, sir. And outside of all the more standard taxes that we pay here in Canada, the government has imposed many different taxes and policies over the years that make specifically targeted on housing, all seemingly with the intention of making housing more affordable.
Some of the lists of this policy measures include a land transfer tax, which everyone pays, a foreign buyer's tax, empty homes tax, a speculation tax, an increased property transfer tax on luxury homes. That's another land transfer tax. In Toronto, there's a municipal land transfer tax on top of their provincial one, increased property tax on luxury homes, a foreign buyer ban, and a mortgage stress test, although maybe not a tax, but just to name a few.
Okay, yeah. So just name a few indeed. So Canadians, I'm sure we are all aware at this point that we get taxed. And most of these policies and taxes have done very little to actually help with affordability, or I believe, Dan, the new politically correct term is attainability. Attainable?
I don't think you're allowed to say affordable anymore. Now, before we start to get into some of the numbers, which are crazy, by the way, how are DCs calculated?
Yeah, so every few years, city staff hire consultants to calculate municipal infrastructure costs using things like the infrastructure master plan, the transportation master plan, parks and recreation master plan.
Great TV show, Parks and Recreation.
Yeah, they didn't seem
Leslie
to have
Knope vibes there.
They didn't seem, and ode to the mustaches as well. If you've ever watched Parks and Rec, you know what I'm talking about. Anyways, so basically they get consultants to come in, analyze several different community master plans, as well as other key documents. Then they start to compare these costs with population and growth projections from the official plan and from census data. Now, they also follow formulas outlined in the Development Charges Act, formally put in 1997, and then they determine a flat fee for each new unit. And new units are new homes, new apartments, commercial developments, industrial facilities, and those differ from city to city and region to region.
Yeah, so let's actually quantify this. Let's just look at some of these fees. In Toronto, DCs for single detached homes have increased from $12,910 in 2010 to $141,139 in 2024. Man, I wish I could get those kind of returns. That would be amazing. A whopping 993% ROI. I mean, really, they figured it out.
I pumped those numbers up. Those are rookie numbers in this racket.
The municipalities, they didn't have to invest in NVIDIA or meme coins or MicroStrategy. You just turn up a dial, I guess. Say you got to spend more money.
I guess when a development charge, which is kind of the bedrock of housing, one of the bedrocks of housing here, is directly comparable to returns on a meme coin. It's probably not a good thing.
Yeah.
So Dan, as you said, right, Toronto, notoriously bad for all this data that always comes out, but up almost 1,000% is insane. Now, development charges, also known as development cost levies, So DCLs in Vancouver, British Columbia. Now, fees will vary slightly within the region there. However, one townhouse in Vancouver, for example, will be charged $30,861 by 2027. That's up from just over $10,000 today.
Yeah, in the township of Langley, developers must soon pay City Hall just shy of $60,000 for each townhome they build. Across the Fraser River in Pitt Meadows, developers only pay a third of that for a similar townhouse.
Now, friend of the show, real estate aficionado and fellow podcaster Steve Soretsky tweeted, the city of Burnaby raised their development fees for high density by nearly $50,000 per unit this year on a one-bedroom condo. That's nearly 10% of the price. He goes on to say that next time a politician promises housing affordability, just know that you are being lied to.
Liar!
By comparison, development charges on a comparable home in Calgary are just $22,000.
So this disparity across the country is crazy. Now, Ontario really does seem to be the worst, though, as per usual. Dan, let's look at some of the comparative markets here. We'll start with Vaughan, and we will return to Vaughan closer to the end of this segment and chat about them again because they just did make some major changes. But Dan, run me through this list here.
Yeah, so you've got Vaughan with 100, and this is a really small image. 145,000. You've got Markham with 132,000. You've got Brampton with 124,000. Mississauga 118. Toronto just under 100,000. Barrie 90,000 ish. Hamilton 67,000, but there's a separated sewer, I think, because they've given their water and sewers to Electra or something like that. Ottawa outside the Greenbelt is 55,000. Ottawa inside the Greenbelt is 46,000. Don't know why it's cheaper to develop in the Greenbelt, but anyway. London, Ontario, 45,000. So, and I guess you said you wanted to return to Vaughan. Do you want to do that now, or
no? We'll save the best for last year with Vaughan.
Yeah, so the average unweighted for GTA is up 274%, and it would be 136,000 in the GTA on average for those municipalities. So a few things to remember. We are still in a housing crisis. We need millions more homes to be built to get back to affordability or attainability or whatever it is, and it may actually be getting worse.
Yeah, and we look at some data to see if it's getting worse. For instance, the number of cranes, and Dan, you and I have been covering the RLB crane index here in Toronto for years now. The number of cranes in the GTA is down roughly 22% this year. Each crane in the sky represents employment for minimum 50 people. So that's a lot of workers that are unemployed. And also in the GTA in the past year, condo sales alone are 81% below the 10-year average. Purpose-built rental apartments starts are down 30% from 2023 and still falling. And home prices, meanwhile, are 4 or 5 times higher than they were 20 years ago. Over the same period, the price of land has also gone up 10 to 11 times. And to top it all off, cherry on top of that, Housing Sunday, development charges are 30% higher.
Gotta love it.
Do you though?
Yeah, no, I don't. But I guess I kind of do because I did mention a while ago that a lot of this stuff would happen, and it is coming true. So that makes me look good, I guess. Everyone was complaining how negative I was, and
being so negative.
I was just like, look, guys, I'm sorry. I don't know what to say other than I wish I was wrong, but I wasn't. So you've got increased prices, shortages in labor, along with increased prices in materials. They were being blamed for making housing less affordable, but taxes, fees, and charges also made up an estimated 31% of the purchase of a new home in Ontario.
So you're telling me it's not the big, bad, greedy developers?
It's actually funny because there was a report by the city of Toronto that talks about like how they were modeling, I think it was their major streets report, how like what they were expecting developers to make as part of like their economic model of like how major streets would improve this. Anyway, what they assumed that developers would be happy with a 15% return, total project return, over, I don't know, I mean, how many years does it take really, right? 5 to 10 years. So you know that it was actually Carlo from Capital Developments who told me that. But they, it's funny from my perspective that they're like, oh yeah, the developer should just be happy with 20 or 15%. Whereas the government is the largest beneficiary of a new home's construction, accounting for 31% of the purchase price of a new home, 3 times more than the residential construction builders and housing material suppliers. So this is why all levels of government should be examining how to reduce these costs while still paying for vital infrastructure and programs that make complete communities. And I would say that the first order of business probably would be spending it a little bit better. But anyway, we can set that one aside for now.
Yeah, it's a whole different story. Now, Dan, you mentioned, labor and materials, but it's not just those, it's high and rising land costs that have also contributed to the lack of affordability. And the price of residential development land has increased by nearly 1,000%. This is the second time I've said 1,000% in this episode, and we've only been talking for a couple minutes. And that 1,000%, that was in London, Ontario. Okay, so you can only imagine places where land was already high and is now even more expensive. And that's been over the last 20 years. Now, this land cost escalation coupled with municipal development charges that have increased from 5,000 to almost 50,000 for a single or semi-detached home period has, again, just exacerbated and contributed to this severe lack of affordability.
Yeah, so it really comes back to supply and demand. The supply is too expensive to build, while at the same time we have seen the demand drastically increase due to factors such as immigration. Since 2010, Ontario's been in a housing affordability crisis, with the unaffordability of homes having increased by 58%. Much of the problem has to do with the affordability and availability of new homes. So the question remains, what are the effects of development charges on new housing supply?
Yeah, well, I mean, by the sounds of it, they are more of a disincentive for builders than an incentive.
Yeah, I mean, essentially developers, whether you're building 5 units or 500, take all the risk and get very little reward. I mean, the municipality doesn't really take on a lot of risk here, right?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes against the old saying, no risk, no reward, or hey, big risk, potential for big reward. How about this new one? Most of the risk and very little reward. It's a little less sexy.
Yeah, it's going to be a tough one to sell for sure.
Yeah. So anyways, let's talk about development charges and the actual impact they have on affordability, Dan.
Yeah, for sure. I will say a lot of developers did make a lot of money. So like it probably was, they were happy with the risk reward trade-off for a while. They no longer are because they're not building houses anymore. So that's what you get. DCs add to the cost of new housing. So they do affect affordability, right? New homeowners carry the fees on their mortgages for years, and they're factored into the rents of new apartments over the long term. The impacts are seen by new homeowners, renters, and it kind of disproportionately impacts younger people, right? Or new Canadians.
Yeah, exactly. It really all is downstream from DCs, right? For a project to even be viable with these astronomical development charges, plus the other fees and studies, plus the taxes, plus the increased costs in labor and materials, who ends up paying for all these things? Well, you do. Not you, Dan, but you listening. Actually, you as well, Dan. You do, we all do. The consumer, the end user, the small cap investor and developer, we all end up paying. And who wins? Well, the government. The construction of new homes is so vital to support the rapid population growth that we've experienced and will likely continue to experience. But the ability of Ontario to build new homes have been decreasing due to all the things I just mentioned. Well, the population has grown 68% since the 1970s. The number of annual new housing completions has actually dropped by 23%.
Yeah, it's hopefully this has given people the excitement that they require to want to listen and want to do something about it, because I think we're gonna give you an opportunity to do that. And Matt didn't really get to the pitch, but the website that they've put together is an opportunity for you to email your MPs, email your politicians, email your municipal government. So hopefully now you have a better understanding of what development charges are, why they exist, and how out of control they've gotten in certain parts of the country, and the impact they're having on housing supply and affordability. Because We did like I've actually had a couple of people message me and ask why specifically we're always advocating for development charges to be reduced. This is why. I hope we've made it clear. And so I want to finish this off with some good news before we bring on our guest, Matt.
Ooh,
yeah.
we have good news. I love when we can deliver some good news.
Oh, good news, buddy. Good news.
Yeah. So Nick, remember Vaughan, who had the worst development charges, and to be fair, we're shamed for having the worst development charges in Ontario by Mike Moffat.
Publicly shamed.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, you ever seen like those memes where it's like bring back bullying and it's like a picture of the Prius? You know what I'm talking about? Have you seen that?
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm not a fan of bullying. I don't think I'm not saying, but I'm just saying it's a meme.
And you
right?
and you drive a Prius, right?
So I'm a big Prius guy. So they, people were really putting the pressure on Vaughan, man. And anyway, let's talk about what they did, Nick.
Yeah, I mean, how could I forget Vaughan? Dan, they were at the top of the list, right? The city where it costs between $90,000 and basically $150,000 in development charges to bring a single unit to market, depending on what type of unit that is.
Yes, that one. And you did say costs, but I should say costed because they just made the news for something much more positive. Can you maybe read me this tweet from friend of the show, Dr. Mike Moffat?
Yes, of course. Mike Moffat, shout out to Vaughan, Ontario, which once had the highest development charges in the province. Today, they cut them by over 44,000 for single and semi-detached, 36,000 for multiple unit, 28,000 for larger apartment units, and 20,000 plus for smaller apartment units. This is leadership. He finishes with an exclamation mark.
And not a big exclamation mark guy either. Like so
very reserved, very calculated.
Yeah,
so this you can tell he's fired up.
4 or 5 of those a year for sure. So this is huge news. Like I honestly do think that it is going to start a trend that other municipalities will follow. I think that this is leadership in a space that we really need. That, and you have developers basically saying if X city does this, we will match the reductions dollar for dollar, which means that new condo prices will come down. That sucks for all the pre-con buyers who bought over the last couple of years, but it's good for the outcome of our country that needs housing affordability really badly and more supply really badly. So from Mayor Stephen Del Duca, who you've probably heard of, he's a pretty prominent dude in Canadian politics, to many of our residents, in particular young families in our community, they've seen their dream of buying a home close to where they grew up disappear completely as housing prices have spiraled out of control. We have a housing affordability crisis, and it's time for us to get real about the solutions needed to solve it. A lot of people I've heard saying like, "Oh, house prices in Vaughan are like $1 million. What's 40 grand gonna do?" I'm like, you know what? You're right. We should have left them. Let's just, you know what I mean? Come on, like. Anyway,
yeah, let's take 0 steps in the right direction. Yeah, so I mean, look, shout out to the mayor of Vaughan there, Mr. Del Duca, and look, the move is not being just praised by 2 lowly guys on a podcast here, Dan. It was praised by Build, that's the Building Industry and Land Development Association.
I mean, Build was on the podcast too.
They were, hey, and friends of the show. We're lucky enough to call them that. Developer Lobby Group, one of the leaders of that Developer Lobby Group, will be joining us here in the next few minutes. And these groups have been calling for an overhaul of fees for quite some time. I quote from Dave Wilkes, president of Build, who has been a guest on the show. This will enhance the financial viability of future projects, unlocking potential investment and stimulating supply. So this isn't just like a one-time thing. Okay, 40 grand, whatever. This is a change in the tide, hopefully, right? The first of many steps in the right direction.